Hanwell Zoo. Go wild in West London.
Hello everyone and welcome to another video from Hanwell Zoo. Today I am joined by Dr. Cerian Tatchley, Joint Acting Director of BIAZA, the British and Irish Association for Zoos and Aquariums. They are a membership organisation for zoos and aquariums in the UK and Ireland and the British territory. So hello Cerian.
Hello, Bo.
How are
Lovely to be
you?
talking to you. I'm really good, thank you. Been very busy today, but very happy to be taking some time out to have this chat with you.
Thank you. I thank you so much for joining us. I know exactly how. In fact, I don't know exactly how busy you are. You must be more busy than I actually know. So thank you so much for taking the time out. It is too lovely to see you. It feels like a very long time.
Yeah, definitely a long time since I've been able to see you in person as well.
I
And
know.
visit you down at Hanwell.
Well, hopefully I'll get to see you really soon. And as I say, thank you so much for joining us. Today I wanted to talk to you about zoos in general. So this series of interviews has really been talking to lots of different people, mainly local people, but lots of different people that the zoo work with that our visitors might not necessarily know we have that relationship or even do or cover that area of work. And that very much goes with all the conservation work and education work that we do via BIAZA and the work that we do via BIAZA. But I did want to talk about zoos in a more wider scope than just Hanwell, because this year's been a difficult year for everyone, not just Hanwell Zoo, or obviously not just zoos, but it's been a big difficult year for so many of us, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about. So how, just to jump straight into it, how has the pandemic generally affected the zoo industry in the UK and Ireland and the British industry?
Yeah, as you say, it's pretty much been an unprecedented situation for everyone, and that includes zoos and aquariums. It's definitely a situation that we hadn't prepared for on this scale, certainly. So the impacts have been pretty massive across zoos and aquariums. And one of the big things, of course, has been the lockdowns, which obviously have been needed to control the virus. That's been very important, and all zoos and aquariums would be very supportive of government efforts to keep people safe. But unfortunately, zoos and aquariums do rely quite heavily on their visitors for a lot of their income, and both from their ticket sales, so when visitors are paying to come in and see the animals, that's obviously income, but also all of the other things that visitors do whilst they're at the zoo. So if they're buying food, or if they make a donation to a conservation project, all of that money just vanished pretty much overnight with the lockdowns. And the other side of that is that, of course, the zoos still needed to look after all of their animals. They didn't just vanish just because the zoos were closed. So maintaining those high animal care standards that we expect of all of our zoo and aquarium members was still really important. So most zoo staff were still going to work and actually probably working even longer hours and working even harder to make sure that their animals were getting all of that care. And that is quite expensive. Providing good animal care is expensive. So the zoos had quite a tough situation where they had no money coming in through their doors, but they were spending lots of money still on looking after their animals. And so the financial impacts have been really very high on the zoos and aquariums. But it's not just those impacts either. Alongside that, obviously a big part of what zoos and aquariums are trying to do is educate their visitors and get them engaged and caring about the world around them, and therefore interested in conservation, so that they can help support the conservation work that zoos and aquariums are doing. And if they didn't have the visitors on site, it became really difficult to keep doing that, because the people just weren't there to be sharing all those stories about what was happening to animals in the wider world. So that's been another kind of really big impact, is that the zoos and aquariums have actually had to work really hard to find new ways, more creative ways of keeping all of that project going. And we have seen some really sad situations of conservation projects having to be delayed by several years now, probably, or actually just stopped completely because of the pandemic, because the kind of funding and also the staff time and expertise to get those conservation projects going just hasn't been able to happen during the pandemic. So it's been a pretty tough time for lots of people. And obviously also, like, staff have been working really hard for now pretty much, it's nearly a full year that we've been obviously in the UK and Ireland dealing with COVID. So there's also lots of impacts just on people's kind of health and well-being as well, and that's something else we're kind of really aware of across the whole sector and across beyond zoos and aquariums too, that lots of people are finding things quite tough, and it's really been really important that we've been able to kind of work to keep people's spirits up and keep them really happy doing their jobs as best they can do under quite difficult situations.
For BIAZA too is another organisation who we've been a member with for 40 years now, a really proud member of BIAZA. But as an organisation, it's been really tough on you too. Not only have you had a large membership to cater for, but also your structures had to change, your working practices had to change. COVID has affected you in different ways and whatnot, and all throughout you have been so incredibly supportive and very present throughout. So I'd love to thank you for that. I think it's incredible the stuff that you have been doing. What sort of things have been going on this year to assist zoos who have been hit not only so incredibly hard by those financial implications that lockdown bring, but also the knock-on effects, as you mentioned, like staff wellbeing and the conservation projects that have to be paused and then delayed. What sort of things have been going on?
Yeah, and yeah, we're a pretty small team in the BIAZA office. There's only been 6 of us for most of this year, so we rely really heavily on the really close work that we do with the kind of expertise from across our membership. So Bo, obviously you are a member of our Conservation Education Committee, and we have lots of our zoos and aquariums working together through our committees to help support us, and none of this that we've achieved this year would have been possible without those. Another factor for us in kind of dealing with the pandemic is obviously we cover quite a wide area. So we obviously have the UK government across the UK, but also within that we have the devolved administrations, and they often have had their own rules and different approaches throughout the pandemic. And then we also have the Irish government as a completely separate country as well. So we've had to focus really hard on making sure we keep up to date with all of the different restrictions and lockdowns and rules and regulations across all of those different countries. So it's definitely been a different year for us compared to how we normally work. But we've really seen the community come together really well. So those committees have all pulled together, the wider membership has all pulled together. And so what we've seen is an awful lot of sharing of experience. So different approaches have needed to be taken. So after lockdowns and zoos were able to reopen, and they obviously had to do so with lots of different measures to make sure that they were COVID safe, and it was a safe place for their staff to be working, for their animals, and it was safe for their visitors to come to. And we saw some really good examples of zoos trying out different ways of implementing safety measures, different ways of making social distancing happen, but in a way that still allowed people to have a good day out as well, because obviously people will learn much better if they're having a good time. You don't want to go to the zoo and not enjoy it, and you're much more likely to be interested in conservation and the animals that you're seeing if you're actually having a good time. So that was a kind of almost quite a new thing to work out. How do we put lots of restrictions and rules in place without causing people to kind of just feel like they actually couldn't do very much, and they just couldn't actually explore the zoo in the way that they used to. So we saw lots of different approaches to that, and then the zoos were all reporting back to us, and that meant that we could produce some really nice guidelines that gave lots of different ideas for how zoos could cope with the new restrictions and could be successful in those key things they want to do. They could get those education programs back working, get people excited about the world again while still being COVID safe. So that's been really important. We've also been really fortunate to build up some really good relationships with the animal welfare teams and also sometimes the tourism teams across the different governments that cover the area that BIAZA works in. So, we have to say that organisations like DEFRA, who oversee zoo licensing, in England have actually been having really regular meetings with us throughout, so often weekly or fortnightly meetings. So they've been really good at giving us all the latest news and answering questions, because sometimes the guidance has been a bit unclear, because the zoo sector isn't huge in the UK. So although it's very important, and obviously to us it is the most important, obviously for the governments it's only one part of many different organisations that need to be covered by guidance. So often there'd be situations that they hadn't thought of in that guidance that happen in zoos and aquariums that just hadn't been covered. And so we've done an awful lot of kind of reaching out to different government teams to get answers to questions, to make sure that our members knew exactly what they should and shouldn't be doing, and to make sure that just that the guidance was sensible as well. So sometimes we saw some things that maybe didn't make sense from a zoo perspective in the guidance, but probably did in a different setting. So we've been lucky to have good conversations with governments to make sure that we could explain why that didn't work and get changes put in place where we needed them. We've also obviously through those government relationships been working to get some funding wherever possible for zoos and aquariums. There's been different levels of success in achieving that across the different countries, and it's happened in different timescales and in different formats. So in England, obviously, was the biggest fund was announced by the government, and eventually they increased it to £100 million for the Zoo Animals Fund, and that is both excellent. It's really great. It's the kind of biggest pot of money that the UK government has provided for zoos and aquariums really in our history, but at the same time it's got a lot of restrictions placed on it. So what we're seeing is that although it's great that there's emergency funding available for zoos that are really in very desperate situations because of the financial impacts that the lockdowns have had on them, actually at the same time there's lots of collections that aren't able to access that money because of various different reasons. Like, it very much is only an absolute emergency fund. So at the moment we're still kind of pushing quite hard to try and get financial support put in place, particularly for conservation and education work. It's such an important part of what good modern zoos and aquariums do, but none of that work is actually covered by that emergency funding that actually so far any of the governments have put in place. So we're really keen to see that kind of challenge resolved, because we don't want to see lots of really long established conservation projects that have had huge amounts of work put into them now start to fail because of this really difficult year that everyone's had, when really these projects are important for years and years to come. So that's a kind of a key area of work that's still ongoing, is trying to get that support for conservation and education projects to make sure that they can continue. And then hopefully in the near future, zoos and aquariums will be able to reopen, and hopefully the vaccination programs will do what we all hope that they will do, and people can start to go back to normal a bit more, and we can start to see some longer term recovery. And then those conservation projects will go back to being funded by the zoos and aquariums just as they normally would. But right now that just isn't possible. So that's a real big concern still.
The key thing there is, well, there's loads of key things there, but good modern BIAZA zoos aren't what necessarily what people think of. No, not what they think of. I hope that's what they think of when they think of zoos. But zoos have faced problems in the past, and they've faced criticism, some founded, some not. But the key thing here is, when we're talking about zoos, we're talking about good modern BIAZA aquariums and zoos, whose main aim are those incredible conservation projects, without which we would have lost so many species already, and those incredible conservation education programs, again, without which we wouldn't be able to reach the people that we reach. And these are the programs that are just so fundamental to what it is to be a good modern zoo. I hate to say it, but I think, you know, a large population, a large percentage of the population might just see the zoo as that quaint thing to do on a sunny afternoon and enjoy themselves, which is fine. And again, as you mentioned earlier, when you're enjoying yourselves, you're more open to learning, and even if that's informal learning or subliminal learning, then it's really, really, really positive. But zoos are so much more than that, and that's very much why we did this interview series, to just expose just a few key areas of the work that we do. They're not necessarily behind closed doors, but it's not as obvious as you would think it might be. But through everything that good modern zoos have faced in the past, I think historically one of the most important things that zoos and aquariums have been is they've been adaptable, and they're very au fait and accepting to change. And I think the approach this time round, which obviously industry-wide, this is probably the biggest issue we've faced, is one of our best responses to it is that we can adapt. So moving forward now, what challenges or what positives might come out at the end of this? So say if looking towards 2021, moving forward, where do you think zoos are going to go from here? And if you hear a little bit of noise, my dogs all just came in. So it might be it might be the odd bark or two, but hopefully they'll be tired now.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Bo. And obviously, as we kind of come towards the end of 2020, I think we're all in a bit of a place where we're looking at, okay, how has this year gone? What's been good? What have we learned from it? And what are we going to take forwards into next year? And I mentioned already those government relationships. Actually, one really positive thing for zoos and aquariums from this year is that we've really built very strong relationships with lots of different government departments. And actually, we've been started to be able to talk to departments that are maybe outside of who we would normally be talking to. So normally we would talk to government departments about animal health and animal welfare, because of course that's absolutely at the center of everything that a good zoo and aquarium does. Animal welfare will always come at the heart of that. But we've also had opportunities now to really build conversations about that conservation work, about that education work, and start to form partnerships that look forward into the next year and even hopefully much further beyond that. We've also been able to build lots of relationships, at least on a BIAZA level, with other membership associations. So there's some other brilliant associations that represent wider visitor attractions, but also things like Countryside Link that do much more kind of conservation and wildlife in the UK based activities. So we've actually built up some really strong partnerships that hopefully we can really work on going forwards. And like you say, we have seen some really adaptive responses to the challenges that have happened, and they haven't always been super successful, but we've learned lots of lessons from them. So, I mean, you and I are both kind of education background people in a big part of what we do. So that's an obvious one to talk about. We've seen lots of very different approaches to kind of moving education projects online. It doesn't always work, but where it does, it offers great opportunities to reach out to much wider communities than we can maybe do coming through just into the zoo itself. So there are some people that would struggle to come and visit the zoos. Either they don't have ones nearby or they just don't have accessibility to them. And there's lots of ways that we're now learning that actually we can reach out to those people and we can bring them in and be excited about what zoos and aquariums do and get them involved in that conservation work using some of these online methods that maybe we hadn't explored as much before. So there's some really good positive things that we can take out of things that have happened this year, even though the year as a whole has been really challenging. There's definitely some strong points there that we'll be looking to capitalize on going forwards and make sure that zoos and aquariums are using those lessons to do what they do even better than before. So to really get that conservation education and even the kind of conservation field work happening even more successfully than it has been using some of those new tools.
I think I'm really conscious of time, and we're going to have to shush now. Sorry, I'm really conscious of time, and I could talk to you about this for forever. And there are so many, as you're talking, there are so many things that I want to pick up on and discuss. But if anyone watching has any questions, I can put them forward to Cerian at a later date.
Definitely.
Answer any questions. I think one of the key things there, what you were just saying, zoos, if nothing, are incredible bastions of hope. And that's not just through this really, really difficult year. In every task that that zoos lay out for themselves, there has to be that element of hope there, whether it's reaching a certain demographic, whether it's education on a certain topic, or probably the most prominent one, if it's conservation of a particular ecosystem or a particular species. Without hope, some of those mountains would be super difficult to climb, and they've been climbed, many times, and that's something that zoos really, really carry with them throughout. And I think that's going to be our strongest tool in combating this. I'm thinking of something. Oh, and this. What I must say. But Cerian, thank you so much. I genuinely, I'm so thankful for you joining us. I know how busy you've been, and I think this will be a really interesting conversation for people to listen to. So thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
No, not at all. No, not at all. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you really, really soon. And to everyone watching, thank you ever so much. Bye bye.
Thank you, everyone.